Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Well, today it's going to be another video on the wood carp or wood shark. I was hoping to have some other stuff done, but the weather and other things have prevented me from doing other projects that I'd like to get out and do some filming on. So we'll talk about this for a bit, and we'll see if we can get it to run enough to go out and do a little cutting. And then we'll come back and talk about some other stuff. So this saw is made in 2011. This is the newest saw I have, and was donated to me by Mr. C. You can go back and watch a video a while back on May 25th of this year, and he brought over a wheelbarrow full of saws and donated them, and mostly home lights. And this one and little Frontier saw. But anyway, the last time we had this out, it quit on us, and the fuel cap had quit venting again. So I've got some new fuel caps coming for this and the boo saw, and the carburetor also went haywire. I didn't rebuild the carburetor. I didn't have a kit or anything for it, and I actually got it to run with the diaphragms and stuff in it, but they were pretty bad and they've stretched enough where it wouldn't run. So I don't know how it'll do today, because I swiped the carburetor off a part saw that was given to me by Butler's Outdoors Canada. It's another channel to watch. And I took it apart, but it looked like new inside, so we'll see if it'll run or not. Otherwise I'll have to wait till I get a carb kit coming. And they're a little hard to find parts for these. I was surprised, but I found a place that had lots of caps. Carb kit was a bit of a challenge, but anyway, I did find one. But the thing that was nice, that Mr. C came over the other day and brought me the owner's manual for this, and I read through it and stuff, and I found out it's not really an owner's manual, it's a comic book. It's got some of the dumbest cornball stuff in it I've ever read. So anyway, let's kind of go over that a little bit and talk about, first it talks about safety and how to cut and how to avoid kickback. And since it's got a anti-kickback chain, you'd have to be doing something really dumb to get it to kick back on you. Talks a little bit about maintenance and operation, how to start it. But the starting procedure on these is kind of interesting, because it has this little purge valve here, and you pump it 6 times. What that does is it purges the air out of the system and fills the carburetor with fuel, and then it starts right up. You still use a choke. It's not a primer. A primer would enrich in the system, and so they have a choke to do that, but all the purge valve does is pumps the fuel through the carburetor. But these are notorious for not starting when they're hot. And reading in the comic book owner's manual here, these things are real prone to vapor locking, especially in warm weather. And what it says for a starting procedure is to push this purge valve 6 times very slowly, and then put it on half choke. And some of the comments I'd received when I did some earlier videos on this, people said that that's what they did, is they'd pulled on the choke when it was hot and then push it back in, and they would start. And I tried that and it works. So anyway, that was kind of an interesting thing, that you have to do that on a saw when it's hot. None of my other saws require that. So anyway, we'll just talk a little bit about things that I've done to it here, minor mods that we're working on. So the one thing, like on this and the wild thing, is that the air filter area is very restrictive. Originally it had these 4 or 3 openings down here, but because trying to get some decent power out of these pieces of carpola here, the port timing is pretty advanced on them, and at idle and even at high speed, some of the mixture in the crankcase before the piston closes the port spits back onto the air cleaner. And the stock air cleaner, of course, is this little gauze thing, and with the setup with this, what happens is that this is a 2-barrel carburetor. The lower barrel here would spit back, and you can see the stain on it here, and that's from the Red Armor oil I'm using. And I've washed this in gasoline, but the stain is still there. And so a lot of people said after a half-hour cutting, change these out, but that seems silly. So what I've done to increase the airflow, put a bunch of holes in here, up here, so that the air can come into the secondary barrel on top and all the way through the filter, plus the bottom. And then I had some foam I talked about in the last video, and I made an air filter out of this stuff. That's really a big improvement. That I talked about, like these are like a diaper. So here's a little gas. We'll just kind of pour it on here. Doesn't go through. It's just like a diaper. Keeps all the crap in. So anyway, I think what we'll do is we'll put it back together. And if it'll run, we'll go out and do a little bit of cutting with it. And got some other stuff I want to talk about when we get back. Okay, well, I wanted to talk just a little bit more about our Poulan Owner's Manual comic book here. And some of the silly things that they have in here. They talk about the starting procedures and all that, which I've gone over, but in here it says, do not use the chainsaw to cut plastic, concrete, brick, steel. It's for cutting wood only. Well, no kidding, it's a chainsaw for cutting wood. But they have to tell you that. And then the other thing talks about, it's for intermittent use only. So that means if you got an hour's worth of cutting, you cut 15 minutes, put the saw away, and then an hour later you go back and cut for another 15 minutes and then put it away, so that 4 hours later you get all your full cutting time in. And then the other thing that's really funny is it talks about using this as a commercial saw. You know, this thing wouldn't last a day in a commercial job. And just talking about it is just extremely silly, but that isn't the worst part of it. The worst part of it is it talks about if you use this on a continuous basis, it's going to damage the nerves in your hands and fingers, which is irreversible. So what does that all mean in layman's terms? Don't buy it. I didn't buy this one, it was a gift. Okay, well, we'll talk about a little bit more here. This, like I say, this is the most modern saw I have, and you know, our channel is about vintage stuff because that's what I like and use. And I just want to talk about comments briefly. I really like comments that I get. You know, a lot of them are really fun, interesting. It's interesting people talking about their careers with saws and different things like that. But once in a while we get a distractor, and I recently had one, and I mean, that was really dumb. So anyway, first of all, like I said, well, new chainsaws are better than old ones. Well, in some instances they are. They're lighter. Some of them cut faster. But the negatives are that almost all of them, you can't work on them. You have to take them to a dealer because of the automatic control system on the carburetor, electronic controls and whatnot. They're complicated and require special tools. These old saws don't need that. And you know, you have to look at it in context. My channel doesn't say modern chainsaws and vintage other stuff too. It's all vintage stuff. And so that's, I'd recommend people, if they want to make comments like that, to not watch the channel. Another one that was kind of corny from the same guy, I'll call him Mr. D because his name starts with D. I'll give him a nickname as D Umbel. So anyway, he talked about the automatic oilers on modern chainsaws because he watched a video I did, and I was talking about the manual override on my McCullochs and some of my home lights and the benefits of them. You know, you get a dirty cut or hard piece of wood, you just pump extra oil on. Keeps the bar and chain well lubed and your RPM's up and they cut great. But he didn't catch that, so he leaves me a message saying, oh, modern chainsaws have automatic oilers. Well, duh, no kidding. So do most old ones. But anyway, so I just left it at that. I told him to, you know, research his information better before he makes a comment. So the last comment he gave me was really nasty. And so that was concerning the purge valve here. He says, oh, everybody knows that's a primer. Well, it is not. for a primer, the manufacturers would call it that, but Stihl and Husqvarna, the two largest companies of chainsaws in the world, say this is a purge valve. It purges the air out of the system if the saw's been sitting, or if it's gotten hot, it's got a vapor lock and stuff, you can push the fuel through it. And what the difference is, on a primer, it actually puts fuel into the venturi of the carburetor. And where this one, even if you use this and pump the fuel through it, it doesn't enrich the mixture, you still have to use your choke. And so that's the difference, but I'll show you one here in just a second. Okay, this is a Briggs & Stratton engine, 6.5 horse, or 6 horse I should say. This does not have a choke, so it does have a primer bulb right here. And so if you pull on this to start it, it's not going to start. So what you have to do, check your fuel first, and then pump this about half a dozen times. In most cases it'll start on one pull, so we release the brake here. Now that's the difference on a primer and a purge valve. Like if you try to start this by just pumping the purge valve, it's probably not going to start. Now, one of my recent videos I actually primed it and it flooded it, but it wasn't because of the primer or purge valve. It's because the carburetor gaskets inside are worn out, and that's the reason it quit in the last video. Fuel cap quit venting, and the diaphragm or the fuel pump and stuff stretched enough where it wouldn't pump fuel anymore. So anyway, if this old piece of carp here will start, we'll go out and do a little bit of nipping with it. Okay, well, we got some wood to cut here. So what I'm going to do is try to run it enough to see if it's going to quit like it did last time. Hopefully it won't. But anyway, we'll do these and then we'll go to a different spot and do a little cutting. So, saw's warmed up, so I need to lean out the high end just a little teeny bit, but really amazed at this safety chain, which is pretty aggressive. Well, it's basically because it's new, but it's in Oregon. It's the best cutting safety chain I've ever had. Most of them hardly cut anything. So anyway, we'll be back here in a bit cutting some more. Okay, I'm going to cut off some of these stumps. One thing I'm going to talk just briefly about, when I go to start this, you'll see I kind of pull it through easily a few times. And Mr. Clark, who is a guy that watches our videos and stuff, was talking about the Red Armor Eco Oil, and it really increases the compression. And so I pull it through a few times to get everything freed up and spinning, and then pull it through to get it to start. Otherwise it's really hard and tries to kick up and stuff. So anyway, I'm going to cut off some of these stumps here and go from there. Like I said, I pull through it. Chain came off. Bummer. Well, anyway, we'll be back after a bit. Well, unfortunately, we had to cut our cutting short because the chain came off, and the carburetor's acting up too. Like I say, I just took it off a part saw. Been sitting for who knows how many years. Look clean inside, but the diaphragms are failing out, starting to try to flood on the low circuit. And I adjusted the high circuit, started getting rich again. So that's the beginning of the end. It needs a carb kit, which I have coming. So anyway, what we're going to do, I'm going to rebuild the carburetor, get a better fuel cap, and air filter mods seem to work good. The saw makes good power now. And the safety chain's got to go. I mean, when I was cutting through that piece of wood, it's probably about 7 inches diameter, so it's really hard wood, and this thing started kicking a little bit and then it split the chain off. So the rakers, the guides on these things in between the cutter teeth are really high, so it's not good for that type of cutting. It's only good for doing vertical cuts. But I ordered a non-safety chain for it too. So anyway, when I come back, and I guarantee you the next video won't be on this saw, I'll actually do something else, but when I come back to it in a couple of more videos or so, we'll finish up the mods here, a few little things to do on it yet, and change over to the other chain. And I'll do some time cuts with this chain, and I'll put the non-safety chain on it and do test cuts with that, timed cuts. And then I'll have a running contest between the Wild Thing Mr. Pooh, which is basically the same saw, just older. It's been in a lot of videos, you can go back and watch them. And we'll do time cuts and see which one performs best. And if after I do the rest of the mods on this and it's still subpar, then I'm going to modify the muffler, because the muffler on the Wild Thing was very restrictive and really a dumb design. I talk about it in some of my videos, so there again, go back and watch them. This one, the muffler is pretty good. It exits on the front where the other one used to exit in the back and put all that heat back here and all that filth and stuff. And the opening on here is fair sized. One thing I could do is make a spacer to put it out further rather than modify it, but there again, I'm going to do time cuts with it first before I do any actual real mods on the exhaust. But there's lots and lots of videos, people doing all kinds of hot rod stuff to these ridiculous saws. So if you need one, get one, and spend the rest of your life doing all the mods trying to make it half as good as a McCullough. So anyway, that'll be our video for today. So vintage is best, even if it's so-so like these. And we'll see you on the next video.